Just days ago, there were cautious hopes that a fragile understanding between Washington and Tehran could prevent a return to open conflict. A memorandum of understanding, indirect negotiations, and a temporary ceasefire were presented as the first steps toward a broader political settlement. Tonight, that optimism seems to have faded. President Donald Trump has declared the agreement effectively over, dismissing further negotiations with Iran as a waste of time, while warning of additional U.S. military action. Within hours, American forces launched fresh strikes on targets inside Iran. Tehran accused Washington of violating the memorandum, insisting diplomacy cannot continue under military pressure, and warning that it reserves the right to respond. The crisis is no longer limited to Washington and Tehran. And Iran says it targeted U.S. military facilities in the Gulf. Kuwait reported intercepting missiles and drones. Bahrain, for its part, activated emergency sirens. Security in the Strait of Hormuz has deteriorated again, driving oil prices higher and renewing fears of a global energy supplies. The international response is equally revealing. NATO has largely backed Washington's position, defending the latest military action, while insisting Iran must never acquire a nuclear weapon and that freedom of navigation through the Strait of Hormuz must be protected. European leaders warned the strikes could further undermine diplomacy, while the United Nations and China continue to urge restraint. So, what exactly are we looking at? If diplomacy repeatedly collapses into military action, is it still diplomacy, or has negotiation itself become another instrument of strategic pressure? Tonight, we ask whether the United States and Iran have entered a new phase, not one defined by either peace or war, but by permanent coercion, where military strikes, economic sanctions, and diplomatic initiatives are used simultaneously. We'll examine those questions with our guests in just a moment. To begin our discussion, I'm pleased to welcome Professor Hamoud Salhi, Associate Dean at the University of California.
Hi, Miriam. Thanks for having me, and my greeting to Sassi on the other hand.
Thank you for joining us, Professor Salhi, and also I'm pleased to welcome Mr. Mohammed Krissasi, geopolitical observer and financial expert from New York.
Welcome. Thank you for the invite, and again, a pleasure to be back, to see you back, as well as my dear friend, Dr. Salhi.
Most welcome to both of you and to our viewers. Maybe starting with you, Professor Salhi, today's event seemed to suggest that the memorandum was unable to prevent the war or a rapid return to military confrontation. So did the latest escalation expose a structural weakness of the memorandum itself?
2 points. Memorandum of understanding are meant to be just an understanding, one's perspective. They are not binding, and they can be sort of interpreted the way each party feels it is interpreted. And that's what the issue we have from that perspective. President Donald Trump has his own interpretation of the Memorandum of Understanding, the Strait of Hormuz, and the Iranians have another interpretations. So the pause period, the 60 days that we were supposed to have, were actually to identify the meanings, the correct interpretations, and before that happens, we are where we are. So it is in the nature of the MOUs, but also the failure to give time to the diplomatic track to move forward, to be able to reach a comprehensive or sort of a common understanding of what meant by those chapters in the MOU.
Mr. Sessi, is this suggesting a weakness in the MOU itself? What is your say?
Well, I'm just going to confirm what my dear Dr. Salhi was saying. It was just, a paper, and I don't think the MOU, the ink that you were used to do it was worth. The President Trump, each and every time, is no trust. It was the 48 hours, it was the 10 days, it was the 60 days. Now, he signed an MOU allowing Iran to have the authority to manage the Detroit of Hormuz, regardless that, the international maritime, Iran have the right for the Detroit of Hormuz. But, nevertheless, it was signed of this piece of paper that you call Memorandum of Understanding, but it's not respected. President Trump said the agreement, he said today, is over. Yet, he's insisting to say that, we can still have negotiation in Washington. I don't know how he's thinking, what he's thinking. If he thinks that Iran, a civilization of 5,000 years, is Cuba or Venezuela or maybe Hezbollah or another country that is trying, like Groenland, is attacking Denmark, etc., he's absolutely wrong. They have been ready. They have 7 years of war with Iran, and Iraq was financed by GCC. I can come back later on the GCC. But this, I don't think Trump would like to have the peace. What he's looking for is the face saving. He lost the war. He knows it. Mm-hmm. He lost it. He cannot sustain the war. Economically, he cannot do it, and militarily, he cannot do it either. Why? To have a missile, to have a patriotic missile, he's not doing in 24 hours. They use it, giving to Israel with the June war, which Israel also, for the 12-day war, they were begging to stop it because they cannot sustain the power of Iran. Everybody was surprised. It was miscalculation. And here we are again after 3 months, another miscalculation. Mr. Trump can come and trumpet all day long that, they don't have, Iran doesn't have the naval power, doesn't have the aviation, doesn't have the soldier. We are going to have a change. We are going to help Iranian to make a revolution. None of the above apply. None of the above was. And, what happened now? What happened? This ceasefire is not a ceasefire. Look what happened in South Lebanon in the MOU the Dr. Salhi doesn't do anything for the South Lebanon. He's in the MOU. It was there. It was linked to the ceasefire in Iran. And what happened is, at the date of today, is 1,766 women and children were killed. So to answer your question here, I just can say that Mr. Trump is really putting the world in a very chaotic position, and you can talk about the Detroit of Hormuz, I said about the international right, but also he agreed upon the authorization for Iran to have to give the authorization, even with Oman. So today's again and again is a betrayal. And this, I can go back, I can go back up to 1953, the problem that US tried to do to Iran. But, we can come back to it later. I give you back the floor.
We'll be back to it later. Maybe just to analyze the Trump statements of today with Professor Salhi. President Trump said today that the agreement is over, yet he's still insistent he's not seeking another full-scale war. And he's also insinuating that there could be indirect negotiations. Now, today, in the light of everything that is happening and with all the recent attacks that we saw in the southern parts of Iran, how should we interpret this apparent contradiction in Trump's statements? Is Washington attempting to strengthen deterrence while avoiding maybe another prolonged regional conflict?
I think it has to do more what is happening at the NATO summit. I think the expectations were high that Trump 3.0, as the Heritage Foundation depicted Europe-American relations, or depicted for many years now. The European didn't come through with the idea of moving forward or implementing the 5% contribution that President Donald Trump has imposed on them. It is sort of surprising that at a time when the summit was going, that such declarations were made the way they were made. Clearly, the intention is also to shift attention away from the Ukraine. In the press conference this morning, Donald Trump went to a large degree, one could interpret some sympathy for the Russian Putin, President Putin, and going making statements like he's losing the war, but at the same time, he acknowledged his relationship with him, all of that. But all those statements are sort of in direct violations of what American foreign policy is all about, taking a stand, supporting Europe. The shift to the Gulf countries, I think, to the Iranian case, well, the Gulf was still there, is intended, number one, from that perspective. The other one, it speaks also volume where the United States establishment of this war is. And it seems, while Donald Trump is leading this, taking positions, at the same time, we should not ignore the pressure that he is having, or he's put under from those who support a continuation of the war, especially those supporters of Israel. So I think what we're seeing is trying to balance out those two parties, and by making it amounts essentially to a conflicting statement. On the one hand, they launch a barrage of attacks against Iran, but at the same time they are saying, well, this is not an all-out war. The reality speaks different. So it's number one, it has to do with this, getting away from the failure of the summit, the NATO summit, and second, trying to create a balance or response to what's happening in the American establishment regarding the positions on this war.
Well, speaking maybe about the NATO summit, Mr. Sesi, we saw the reactions of the NATO and the positions. They said that the new attacks by the US on Iran were absolutely necessary. These are remarks made by Mark Rutte, the NATO Secretary General. We saw President Donald Trump saying that NATO allies, he wanted them to keep the United States in the alliance at the leaders' meeting in Ankara. Does this say, or what does it say about Trump maybe wanting the NATO countries to be dragged in this war, or does it say that now they are all unified over a strategic position on Iran's stance?
Okay, let's just go back a little bit about NATO. NATO primarily is a collective defense alliance focused on the Euro-Atlantic region. The instability in the Middle East directly affect NATO strategic environment. Turkey, we have to talk about Turkey. This is, they are there, and Erdogan, great with the big, welcome, Mr. Trump. But the problem is no unification in NATO. When you have Mr. Trump, he got there and he insulted them. Spain, for example. And then you have Italy, who express, their non-desire for this war. France now, more or less, they come, one day they were with him, one day they are against him. But we don't see here the unity of NATO regarding the war in Iran. Number one is a war of choice from Mr. Trump. Number two, he's insulting them, telling them, you don't give me money to do the war. Therefore, if you are attacked, I'm not going to defend you. And he said that clearly. I think Dr. Salhi was referring to the speech that he gives this morning. And it was very clear that, is no unification in the NATO. Now, the impact of NATO, of course, they have to be involved. You have to be involved. You have Turkey. Turkey is the first military power in the NATO after the United States. And Erdogan have an excellent relation either with Iran, and also with the Gulf region. So he doesn't want to get involved. Matter of fact, Erdogan, Turkey, didn't allow the NATO flight to take off from Turkey to go and bombard Iran. So therefore, when you talk about NATO, is a very, very tricky situation now within the member of NATO. Is no unity at all. And also they are affected with the war in Ukraine.
Yes.
And militarily, as I was saying before, they don't have the capability now. It doesn't take 24 hours to do a missile or Patriot. They give it for the June last year with the Israel-Iran war, and here we have been 3 months now. Mm-hmm. And each and every time Mr. Trump come and said, oh, we destroyed them. But each and every time they come back and they hit, like today, they hit Bahrain, they hit Qatar, and they hit Saudi Arabia. Well, this is the report that I just saw before, just read before the meeting. But it means that now you have to have a prolonged cycle of military exchange between the two. Mm. It's not desescalation, it's escalation, and now it's become more serious. And now we are going to go back to the economic also side. I know you are going to ask me a question about it. I can give you the introduction. Now Iran is not affected as much. Why? Because they find the alternative route through Asia up to China. So they
will probably speak maybe about the consequences. Maybe just to have a comment by Mr. Salhi on the NATO. If the military pressure continues, do you think that the NATO countries, after the statement of Mark Rutte about the US attacks on Iran, will they become more directly involved in in protecting the shipping lanes, for example, the regional bases and Gulf infrastructure?
I think it is connected very well to the European. Let me a little bit give example. The Americans at this point, and Sassy, our friend Sassy could point this, the gas prices are expensive in California, but California is not a Republican state. The prices are very high. When you look inside the country of the United States, I have a point on this. The gas price went high, but not to a point where these prices are affecting the American people in ways that would come out against President Donald Trump. But they are affecting the Europeans, the Asian. And the reason they are not affected that much in the US because the United States is digging too deep into the reserves and they are going to be sort of in trouble later. So when NATO members, the European, make that position, in fact, they are actually making the connection between President Trump issuing this refusal or no longer accepting the Memorandum of Understanding, which a lot of people had high hopes for them. Yes. They interpreted that as against their national interests. By taking a position with Trump, they feel maybe the President Trump could change his views, and so I think that's where these things are coming. Are we looking for Europe to take a strong stand with Donald Trump? Possibly, but not to the extent that the Americans want them to take. Mm-hmm.
Maybe, Mr. Sassi, following today's developments, what do you see as the most likely scenario? Are we looking at renewed indirect negotiations between the US and Iran, a prolonged cycle maybe of limited military exchanges, we've already been there, or a return to open warfare between Iran and the US? Which scenario appears to you the most realistic tonight?
I will try to humbly answer a question. It's not an easy one. In my point of view, but it's my humble assessment. Most likely, you have number one, most likely a prolonged cycle of limited military exchange. This scenario, as Dr. Salhi said before, historically characterized much of US-Iran interaction over recent decade and represent a classic manifestation of coercive diplomacy under this dynamic state simultaneously. He employed limited military pressure and diplomatic dialogue, not to achieve a total military victory, but rather to alter the adversary cost-benefit calculation and strengthen their own position in the negotiation table. But this is one point. But you have the other point, the less likely. This was the most likely. The less likely is the renewed diplomacy and stabilization under the MOU, even though you have some major discrepancy of interpretation. But nevertheless, it's a negotiation that become more politically complex because of the direct military action that you have today and yesterday. And also the question of trust. You have the public rhetoric now that sharpen the leaders who face a domestic audience, the cost to project strength. For example, Dr. Sarhi was talking about the price in California because it's not very good. But also, if you look at the price of the barrel, it was at $132 at the beginning of the war. For the last month, is between $75 and $82. So why? Don't forget one thing. America doesn't import oil, they export oil. Alors, more or less, they have kind of speculation here, and they are playing on it. But again, to come back to the likely scenario, I think the full-scale war will not happen. I don't think it will happen. Okay. It will spread a little bit to the GCC. Why? Because Iran have to use the deterrent that they are not going to let them just take a stick and do whatever I told you to do. And this is why, but in another hand, they are not completely out of their mind, and they know that they cannot sustain it either. They show that they are resilient. Yes. They show that they can defend themselves. They show that it was miscalculation. But now Trump, in his word, and again, to get back to what Dr. Sarhi said, now we begin to see that is a pressure to stop this madness. You have the pressure because you have the AIPAC that support the war and they want to be the megaphone of Mr. Netanyahu, this warrior. But you have also the MAGA base. The MAGA base is 70% of them. They say, now we stop this madness. It cost us billion. Why you have to do it? It's not our war. It's the war of Israel, and you let yourself under the singing of the muse of Mr. Netanyahu. And this is why your question is, I give you the most likely, the less likely, and the one that you are looking for, which is to stop the madness. He loses the war. He's trying to find what you call it a safe face saving. But, you know, at one point, you have you touch a little bit about the NATO. Military now is not the issue. You cannot just bombard the country. Iran is 95 million people. Yes. Iran is as big as Europe. And the European, the NATO, they have the problem of Ukraine.
Understood. Maybe just to get back to Mr. Salhi for a last question, since we're almost running out of time. We just got
really? I'm sorry. I
2 minutes.
Sorry about that.
No worries. Just, Mr. Salhi, since we spoke about the possible scenarios, what do you expect, and can the ceasefire still survive after those fresh US strikes inside Iran?
As I say, no. I think we are moving towards what I call the Israeli model, where the Israelis try to have negotiation only to renegade them. Trump is very, very smart at this. We are going to see this kind of attacks continuously, and part of it is to shape the public opinion, part of it to appease those who are wanting United States to continue fight this war, and lastly, because we are so close to the elections, at one point or another, the American and the Iranians will have to come to a resolution, and that resolution will be by putting an end to this ceasefire. I would see this continues for a month, but after that, our eyes or the public relation will shift into the midterm elections. Donald Trump doesn't want to go to those primaries elections with him not resolving this conflict, either getting out with an agreement or bringing a victory.
Absolutely right on it. Yes, I say Dr. Salhi is absolutely right on this statement. I mean, we cannot sustain, I don't know if it's going to be only for 1 month, but for sure, before the election of November, Trump have to look at his base, specifically the mega bed. They are very, very, very uncomfortable with this war at the kitchen table. He comes them with the tariff with China and the cost. We are paying the cost for it. Now you have the war, not only for America, but he make a big cow in the world, and that cannot sustain. I don't think Mr. Trump can go further, and I think he's going to lose the election in November because of that. No matter what happens, he's losing already.
Professor Salhi, any last words?
No, I mean we are going to witness this kind of clashes back and forth for a while now, and it's again President Donald Trump at his best, using public relations to score points and sometimes to deceive others. It is a complicated issue. What we've seen so far is the Iranian continuously to show that they are not a small player. They are major actors, and there are consequences to their to United States action. And the biggest problem for the United States is the upcoming elections, and sustaining this increase in living conditions and inflation to a point where there will be a point where the Americans will have to ask and start to question seriously about it.
Thank you very much to both of you, gentlemen, Professor Salhi and Mr. also Sasi, for your insights.
Thank you very much, Miriam, and glad to see you again. Bye-bye, Doctor.
Nice seeing you both.
Yeah. Thank you both, and thanks to our viewers. See you in the next editions.